For me, the urges began in adolescence, but I was 21 before I actually touched any imperial porcelain. Well, my first experience of actually handling pieces made for the emperors was as a young probationary specialist at a well-known auction house. I got to play with the toys. I just was in heaven. There is a huge world of difference between seeing an object through glass in a cabinet and actually getting your hands on it. In the West, we don't actually value the notion of feeling an object as much as they do in the East. You're in direct contact with the people who made this, whenever it might have been. There was one collection above all which I wanted to get my hands on. The celebrated Sir Percival David collection.
Inside Pekin is the Forbidden City. It was where emperors once lived in barbaric splendor.
Percival David began collecting ceramics in his 20s, just as the imperial system ended. He had legendary taste and remarkable access.
The Percival David collection is the finest collection of Chinese ceramics outside China.
The great collector was born in India in 1892, into a dynasty of merchant princes. He first visited China in 1923.
He's entering China at a time that's quite exciting in terms of the art world. We're seeing a lot more ancient things appearing in the market. He was paying top dollar for many of the objects he acquired. But of course, he had the funds to do that.
Today, the collection is on public display at the British Museum.
He felt that he was so fortunate to have direct experience of China and of Chinese things outside of China. And he was one of the lucky few who could purchase what he really wanted. He wanted to share that.
Museums like statistics. The average visitor to the British Museum dwells in a gallery for 174 seconds. But in Gallery 96, the average stay is 7 minutes. Now, in those 7 minutes, 60% of the people asked what was it like visiting Gallery 96, put it down to an emotional and a spiritual experience. And I'm sure that Sir Percival would have been very pleased. Many visitors are Chinese. I believe they're reporting more than the spiritual uplift that comes from expensive antiques. I think it's a response to an enigma. These vessels are ancient, but unchanged by the passage of time. They reverberate with bygone eras. It's just a question of listening for the echoes. I've chosen 5 pieces from the Percival David collection and 1 from modern China. They're all old friends of mine, pieces I've known for years. Now, I won't just be looking.
Well, you've got a massive pair of vases. Is this?
For 3 decades, I've handled ceramics without price and sometimes without value, but always with care. But this is different. Handling these pieces calls for control of one's nerves. Many are priceless. They're all fragile. My first choice may come as a surprise, but to me, it's a minimalist masterpiece.
This is a film about beautiful objects. To many people's eyes, this is no more than a dog bowl. I think this is exquisite. White, porcelain, the material that we, above all, associate with China. This has an ivory feel to it, cold to the touch, but smooth as satin. This was made at a time when there were no enamels, there were no colours, but you could decorate it by scratching or carving a design into the surface. And you can almost see the hand movement of the potter. He will use a wire or a little cutter and turn the basin round, and he'll get this beautiful flow. For me, that's one of the most satisfying tests. When you look at it, does the design make you want to turn it round? Does it have life? Does it want to rotate itself? It sounds a bit highfalutin, but that's the way it is. And then in the center, we have this beautiful array not only in the center, but on the inside of that galleried rim. And my word, the copper band just gives it this presence. To think that the Normans were still rampaging over England at the time this was made.
This basin was made around the end of the 11th century AD, an example of what is called dingware. It was designed for the use of an intellectual or scholar, and it opens my first window onto a particularly Chinese trait, the respect for learning and for the learned.
In all sorts of different walks of intellectual life, there's a very powerful Chinese tradition of scholarship. It might be about art, philosophy, or food, or music, and it is distinctive from our own.
11th century China was ruled by the Sung dynasty, emperors to whom scholars were heroes.
In Chinese society, people were ranked according to their profession. At the top was the scholar, then came the farmer, then came the artisan or craftsman, and right at the bottom was the merchant. When the Sung came to power, scholarship was greatly revered, and being able to read and write and appreciate your venerable past was a most important quality.
But academic excellence was of less importance than athletic prowess. When in 1127, marauding Tartar forces chased the Sung out of their capital, Kaifeng, they fled south to a city that is today called Hangzhou. I wanted to see the town where the Sung found refuge. Hangzhou sits in a natural hollow by a picturesque lake with a gentle climate perfect for growing tea. The Sung court had been through hell. This was heaven. The Southern Sung dynasty, as they're known today, began to make their new capital a thriving metropolis and a centre of academic excellence. So naturally, they left good records.
The urbane citizens of Hangzhou had a bewildering choice of evening classes for those interested in the sciences and the arts. There was a choice of the Early Music Society, the Horse Owners Appreciation Society, the Girls Choral Society, the Calligraphy Society, and all sorts of other interests, including the Ghost Hunters Society, the Exotic Food Enjoyers Society, and the Antique Collectors Society. Now that's one 12th century club I should love to have attended.
To run their very civil society, the Sung required a civil service. Examinations were open to all, and standards were high. Pushing a pen, or rather a brush, required fluency in the classics and dexterity with the scholar's tools.
Calligraphy is really at the base of any scholar's performance. The scholar surrounded himself with useful utensils on his table, a whole array of objects that would have helped you with the pursuit of your writing or your painting. But you didn't want to use something that was ugly. You wanted to use something that would lift your spirits, and each of these would have been beautiful in its own right.
Our bowl is such a tool. Chinese calligraphy is more than just writing, it's art. Sung officials had to paint words, or rather characters, beautifully. At the Hangzhou Art Institute, the scholars' tools still include the ink, the brush, and the bowl to rinse one from the other. The dingware basin is almost certainly a brush washer.
This is very, very beautiful, very, very impressive, and you have a very appreciative audience. Here we are in Hangzhou, famous for the Sung dynasty. Is there one style associated with the Sung dynasty scholars?
For the dynasties following the Han, there were lots of changes in style. The Sung dynasty had its own calligraphy orientation. It was more free, more able to express inner feelings. Each era had its own style. As far as art is concerned, the Wei and Jing periods were the most creative. In the Tang Dynasty, law and regulations were emphasized. In the Song Dynasty, they wanted to walk in a different road. Cultured people were more natural, living in a different historic climate, and this more expressive literati created a more expressive style.
My English name, when said in Chinese, is not good. Last Thup. It means trash can. So many years ago, I asked my Chinese friend to find a good Chinese name for me, and Su Bo Le. Oh, I must use this. This is a Guanyao brush washer. Okay, here we go. Next bit is something like this. And the next bit is... Are you good?
Run by academics, Song society was calm and ordered. And in order lies contentment, a precept of Confucianism. When the brushwasher was made, Confucius had been dead for nearly 1,500 years, but the Southern Song resurrected interest in the philosopher. The study of his teachings and precepts, regarded then and now as the pursuit of scholars.
Confucius, perhaps one of the most famous philosophers of all time, was born in 551 BC. He was a minister in the state of Lu, and there he is. Famous for his sayings, many of which, of course, are apocryphal, but in fact, an amazing man. He set the entire basis for the way in which China has been run in the 2,500 years ever since. He believes in proper relationships, that we have a duty from one person to another, from superior to inferior and vice versa, and believes that a state that knows what those relationships are is a well-ordered state and one which will succeed.
A society run by thinkers is a well-ordered one. But what else does the tale of the scholars tell us about the Chinese? That they've long recognized that you don't have to be rich to be clever. Emperors were chosen by heaven, but everyone else was chosen on merit.
For hundreds, for thousands of years, the scholar was the glue holding together Chinese civilization. A lowly farmer's boy could rise to become an imperial government minister if he applied himself with scholarship and study.
There's no question at all that there are limits on what is regarded as acceptable in Chinese universities and so on. There's still great respect amongst the Chinese for scholarly pursuit. The most coveted position for a young Chinese graduate is to work in some shape or form in the state. Or if they want to work in a company, they still by and large prefer to work in a state-owned company than a private company.
Dingware is low-key and maybe an acquired taste. Time for my second object. If you thought that was plain, what about this? This is my second piece. A very plain object, a very classical thing. In terms of ceramics, the Song dynasty is perhaps my favourite. The wares are so exquisitely simple. There is a sort of serene simplicity in their beautiful monochromes. This piece dates from around 1100 AD, about a century younger than the brushwasher, but still from the Song era. It's known as guan, or official ware, fired in a government kiln, and plain isn't the word.
Wow, what a fantastic object. It's called a zong. I'm going to turn it upside down. This is a little bit of a dream. Here we go. There it is. That's the bottom of the piece. The first thing that strikes you is its presence. It's actually a very sturdy object. It has good weight. It's not too heavy. It's certainly not too light. And the other thing is the feel of it. This has a creamy texture, and it is a very, very beautiful colour. It's a sophisticated colour. You see all sorts of tones of blues and greens, and you have this celadon glaze covered in a fracture, a craquelure. Now, it's technically an error, but the Chinese potters rather liked this effect. They actually cultivated the effect. It is remarkable to think that an object which might pass most modern people by if it was in the shop window, as an interesting shape may be, is actually 800 or 900 years old.
When this object was made, the technique of manufacturing porcelain was still relatively new, but the unusual shape of the vessel was very, very old. The form dates back thousands of years to the Stone Age. Objects of identical shape have been discovered amongst the bones of the Chinese Neolithic tombs.
They are very mysterious objects, and they obviously have a special meaning, but because they were made in the prehistoric period, before there is any writing, nobody knows exactly what they were or what they mean.
This vessel speaks to me about another very Chinese characteristic: respect for the past and for the ancestors.
The Chinese are aware of, familiar with, influenced by and intimate with their own history. Any discussion or debate of any importance or profundity in China is inevitably punctuated by quotes from, citations from an old sage. This is completely different, I think, from the way the West operates.
This object takes us back to the southern Sung dynasty in their new lakeside home, digging in.
In the Song period, you have the beginnings of antiquarianism and even archaeology. People start digging ancient things up from the ground, and although they didn't know precisely what period these things dated from, they were treasured, and many of the shapes copied in ceramic. The Song liked the sense of being connected with their ancient ancestors.
The modern residents of Hangzhou are also keen to be linked with their ancestors. When the refugee court arrived here in 1127, Hangzhou was a trading post. Within a century, they'd made it a hotspot of creative excellence.
The citizens of Hangzhou are so proud of their Song heritage, the heritage of scholasticism, of scholarliness, of taste, that they've decided to open a theme park. You could call it the World of Song, which encapsulates all of these virtues.
This theme park, the Song Town Scenic Area, celebrates the glamour that the Song brought to Hangzhou. But that took time. When they first arrived, they had nothing but the clothes they stood up in.
When the Song were driven south, great treasures were lost. So one of the first things they wanted to do was make new and beautiful objects.
The Song form vessel is quite a rare piece. I mean, many of these objects are rare, but this one's exceptionally rare because it's a shape that's not natural to ceramic. It's a shape that's based on ancient jade. And it's very difficult to recreate that quite solid jade form in ceramic. So I'm guessing the failure rate for making those was quite high. So the fact that this one survived and it's in such good condition, it's really quite exceptional.
30 years ago, archaeologists uncovered one of the Sung kilns. Not just any old kiln, but the Guan kiln, the very one in which official wares had been fired. These are the fragmentary brothers and sisters of our second object, the Tsung.
Just look at these pieces, some of them more or less intact, others in tiny pieces, and look at the variety of colour. Now this piece here is an incense burner. Over here we've got a basin which is almost certainly a brush washer for calligraphy, and then beyond that we have a very, very traditional Chinese shape known as a mei ping, a plum blossom vase, a very, very beautiful thing. And beyond that, they haven't recovered all of the pieces, but it's a really intriguing little double vase, an outer vase containing an inner vase, and the outer wall has been pierced with a pattern. And this sort of play with clay was something the emperors loved.
But it's not just the pots that brought me here. The museum is built around the most important discovery of all, the foundations of the kiln itself.
And here it is, the famous dragon kiln of the 12th century. Quite possibly the same kiln in which our Tsung vase was fired. It's amazing. It's 48 meters in length. The original fire is set down in the firebox at the very bottom, and the flame is drawn all the way through by this slope, which acts as a flue. Guanwares are very, very sophisticated. They've already been fired in a low firing before they reached this stage, and they've been dipped several times in this wonderful glaucous glaze. And on this site, they've discovered shards identical to the material that we see in that fantastic Tsung vase.
1,000 years ago, this was the white heat of new technology. But the Tsung shape was already ancient, a form revered for its antiquity, even though nobody knew what it had originally meant.
In the Song dynasty, you can imagine an emperor or a collector wanting a piece of ceramic in this mysterious jade form, just as a curious thing to own.
Whatever its original function, we can say it's one of the oldest forms still in use in today's China.
So this shape links the deep past with the present. It links the ancestors with the people of now. It's transferred it into a vase, a wine vessel, and it even supports a modern building.
Even if the meaning eluded scholars of the Song, they still revered it. To me, the survival of the shape shows us that for the Chinese, though the past is gone, it's never forgotten. In the rush to build a new China, the country has become a construction site. But in the midst of change, the past is a constant. As in the Song era, modern Chinese look to their ancestors for comfort and security. In mid-March every year in China, millions go to visit their dead. Grave Sweeping Day takes 2 days. Their reverence for the past and respect for the ancestors who populate it isn't unique, but does it have an extra resonance for the Chinese?
Ancestral worship is very important to understanding the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese are not a religious people. It's a stress on continuity. One of the extraordinary kind of paradoxes of China today is that no society in the world is changing more quickly, and yet at the same time is influenced more by its own history.